But off the field, a lot of weird, I think, is kind of the word I'm going to use a lot this
Weird. A
podcast.
lot of weird stuff.
A lot of weird stuff. Not unsurprising. No Colt Keith. No Justin Henry Malloy. But Andre Lipschitz and Miguel Diaz up in the show for the Tigers for the September 1 call-ups. I texted you like a couple days ago. I was like, hey, how you want to handle this week or whatever? And you were like, well, we can just talk about how they're not going to call up Colt Keith and Justin Henry Malloy.
That
Spot
should
on.
occupy most of our time.
Spot on right there, my man. So the number one thing that like I took away, and again, we knew this was happening because Scott Harris had laid it out when Parker Meadows got called up, and then later on, I believe it was on 97.1, basically said like, we're gonna make some moves that aren't gonna be favorable on Tiger's Twitter, and I'm paraphrasing there, but he did use the phrase Tiger's Twitter, which I appreciate.
He did.
So I call
Scott, just get off Twitter, man. You're not doing yourself any favors by reading the replies.
X, formerly known as Twitter. Scott Harris doubled down, Cody. This was like a Scott Harris double down week to bring up Lipschitz and Diaz and just maintain the fact that like we're not just gonna call guys up. So I guess before we kind of get into like some broader stuff, your initial expected reaction to Lipschitz getting and Diaz getting the call up in September 1st, whereas some other teams like the Yankees bring up Dominguez and like some high, by the way, shout out his first career home run. But some high profile prospects, the Tigers opt not to do that. So some initial thoughts on that, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like I want to talk through this. Like I'm having trouble wrapping my head around it because I don't want to be that guy who's just clamoring to call up the prospects. I don't think that's ever really been my brand, right? But I just think that Justin Henry Malloy has been in AAA all season, and he has an on-base percentage above 420 all year. He's been there all year. He's done well all year, consistently. I know his defense is bad, all right? You don't have to explain that to me. First time I watched him take grounders at third base in spring training, I was like, oof, doesn't look like a third baseman. All right? So he's also played the outfield. He's played left. He's played right. I'm sure he's not great out there either. I don't know that another month in AAA is going to make him suddenly a better defender. You could argue, I don't know, get him up to the majors. Have him work with George Lombard, Gary Jones, be around some major league players. That'd probably benefit his defensive development as much, if not more, than doing these things in the minor leagues. This is a guy who's you want to be part of the future, part of next year's team. He's proven he can hit in AAA. I think there'd be benefit. Scott and AJ talk a lot about finishing off development at the major league level. Justin Henry Malloy seems like someone who has earned that right to me. Colt Keith, thought about it. I can be a little more, I get it, because he just hasn't been in AAA quite as long. One of the things I heard this week, Scott Harris, doesn't really want to repeat, like Spencer Torkelson, who at the time everyone would have been livid if he wasn't promoted to the majors. But in hindsight, you could argue he was rushed. Torque only had 155 plate appearances in Toledo. He hit 229 in those plate appearances. Colt Keith, though, already has more plate appearances in Toledo than Spencer Torkelson had. He has 216, and he's hitting 302, and he has 10 home runs. So he's not ready, but Andre Lipschitz is ready. Andre Lipschitz, who has been in Toledo a little bit of last year and this year, but has a lower batting average than Colt Keith, has 12 home runs in 104 games. Colt Keith hit 10 homers in 48 games in Toledo. You could argue Andre Lipschitz has earned the right. He's done well. He controls the strike zone. He is probably a little bit better defensively than Colt Keith. But again, I just don't believe that Colt Keith is going to grow leaps and bounds as a defender because he spends September in Toledo. So I don't get it. And I don't really think it's a service time matter because there are now, it could be, But in an ideal world, I think you want both Keith and Malloy pushing to be on your opening day roster. And MLB now has incentives for putting prospects on your opening day roster. It could get you a draft pick. So service time manipulation isn't even as uh
Advantageous.
widely advantageous. So that's where I land. I don't understand why you wouldn't want these guys getting some reps in the major leagues right now. Am I wrong? What am I missing?
I don't think you're missing anything. I think that's actually probably the key point of this discussion is that there normally I would say there's not like a right or wrong, but there is a wrong in the sense that the wrong move could hurt development. So I don't want to say there's no wrong answer, but I can't claim to tell you which the wrong answer is. But for Jahan, I'm just generally speaking as a principal, I'm not really in favor of guys who have at least one major league tool, in theory, spending the whole year in AAA, like start to finish. Like as a general principle, like I tend to think like if you expected him to do X and throughout the entire summer he's done X, and especially if you're a team in the position that the Tigers are in, then why not? Then why not? That's just kind of like a general thing that I tend to believe. In
You
regards,
don't see it very often.
no, you don't. You
You don't
don't.
see
And
guys spend a whole year in AAA unless they're struggling, and he has not struggled at the
or,
plate.
or somebody that just generally speaking doesn't have a major league profile. Like you just have guys there or whatever. Right. So
Right.
I tend to think like this is the time to kind of get him to the major leagues. That's what I tend to believe. And I think the argument is shorter to keep him in AAA than Colt Keith. So outside of plate appearances in Toledo, in comparisons with the Spencer Torkelson conversation, like if Colt Keith is not your starting third baseman, and I guess there is an offseason that we don't really know exactly what the roster will look like. But just generally, as of now, you're looking at Colt Keith competing for a starting 5-hole job, right? In spring training next year.
Yeah, Chipper Jones or Scott Rowland aren't walking through that door.
No, no,
Unless there's
nor
some
is Brandon
trade
Inge.
that I can't even fathom right now. It's going to be Colt Keith or Matt Vierling probably playing third base for you.
Exactly. So therefore, there's another parallel with the Spencer Torkelson thing, whereas he won a job, slightly handed a job in spring training of that year without having any prior major league experience. So I know the plate appearances will be a little bit different. He was a college guy. Colt has come up, after a prep career. I understand it's not exactly the same. But to me, if you're going to say, and again, like something that I tend to do is like, if you put something out there, that's always going to come into my mind with every action you do. And I'm talking about Scott Harris. So if you say, I'm going to earmark at bats for young players, and you have an opportunity to call up 1 to 2, and I think one argument is stronger than the other, but they're both pretty dang strong, guys to earmark at bats for at this time, guys that you figure in, no matter what happens the rest of the year, you figure into your 2024 plans. This is the time to earmark at bats. So it's a little strange to me, like, to kind of balance those things out, I guess is the bottom line. And again, I see the argument for keeping them there. Like, I see it. I don't like it. It's not the lean that I would have, but I see it. But I see it a lot less with Jahan and Colt Keith. You could just argue like, look, let's just keep him stable or whatever. But if you're with the guys that they're trotting out there every day now, guys that we kind of have figured out at the major league level, it has me yearning for at least a Malloy. Because again, whole year AAA, there's not that much of an argument against like call up Parker Meadows, but not Malloy. Are we basically having the same discussion? It's kind of feels like the same discussion, except obviously Parker plays great defense, but it just in terms of the general principle of it, feels like the same discussion. I don't like either or stuff when it comes to like evaluating players. That's just me though.